In today's episode, we are diving into one of life's most universal experiences called regret. Regret is an emotion we all grapple with at some point. Those moments that leave us questioning your decisions, timing, or actions. I'll be sharing my personal journey with regret, how I used to approach it, the lessons I've learned, and the story behind one of my biggest life regrets. Together, we will explore how regret isn't the enemy, but rather a guide that can point you towards clarity and meaningful change. Hi, my love. Welcome to today's episode. And I want to start this podcast around regrets with why I actually started this podcast, and that ties so beautifully into today's topic. But here's something that I want you to do, and something to make this episode even more valuable to you. So I want you to bring a regret of your own with you. It could be a lingering what if. I know that in our mind catalog, we have a lot of what ifs from years ago, or just maybe there was a recent mishap that's been weighing on your mind. And by the end of today's conversation, I'm very confident you will gain a fresh perspective and feel lighter about the weight of that specific regret that you will bring along. So let's get started. One of the biggest reasons I started this podcast was super simple. I didn't want to regret not having done one. You know that feeling when you just, sit back and wonder, what if I had just gone for it? What if I would have taken the chance sooner? What if I'd taken that opportunity when I thought about it? And you know what? I didn't want that what if hanging over me. The thought of me looking back in a year or two and wishing I'd started this podcast journey a year ago, 2 years ago, or even 5 years ago really just pushed me into action this July, and I just went completely bold with the podcast. I had the idea to start it, and a week later, I already published my first episode. And let's be real, something about not acting on your desires can really mess with you. So, that gnawing feeling that you missed out or never gave yourself the chance to try can really mess with you for years on end. But you might even take that onto your deathbed at some point. Because, some of the regrets we will carry a lifetime. And there's no way that you have to do that. And I will help you today with today's podcast to let go of all the old regrets by really diving deep into this, stingy feeling, or stingy, not stingy, stingy feeling of, I wish I'd done it. I wish I had said that thing. I wish I took on that job. So, and for me with the podcast, I took that fear, flipped it around, and decided to be the change I wanted to see in myself. So I didn't want to wait for the perfect moment to start a podcast. I didn't believe someone will, tap my shoulder and say, hey, why don't you do a podcast? I'll help you. Or someone handing me a complete full podcast on a silver platter. So, I didn't want to miss out. And so I just went for it. So, no more regret on the podcast. And, this podcast is for me my living out loud, authentic, and unapologetic being. And I'm here saying I'm going for it now instead of just letting what ifs rule my present and my future. And I've could gone that way to say like, oh, it's not the right time to do a podcast, or I'm already late, I should have done it 5 or 10 years ago, so the podcast train left without me. But that is exactly the thinking why you will pile up on your regret mountain more and more, because there's never right timing, and you will never be late. Because even though I could have done, let's say, a podcast 5 years ago or 10 years ago and would be now so much further ahead, that doesn't help. I'm starting it now, and I know that I will look back in a year or two and think like, I'm so grateful for the version that in July 2024 went for recording a podcast. So whether you're thinking about starting something new or stepping into something bigger for your own self, just ask yourself this specific question. Do I want to look back and regret not trying? Or do I want to leap in and say, well, I did that. I went for it. So I think it's pretty straightforward when you have those two questions next to each other, which one you prefer answering. And we are diving deep now in the nature of regrets, and I will bring really to the table why it is so important to not ignore regrets. So hold that one regret, or maybe you have 5 regrets with you on this podcast journey, on this episode today, with you closely to your heart, because now we're diving into the nature of regret. And I want to start with the question, what regret really is. We all know that feeling, but what is it? And at its core, regret is the feeling of like sorrow or disappointment over something that has happened or something that hasn't. And it's this emotional response to that gap between your reality, so your today's reality, and your very idealized what could have been. And that gap in between is where this emotional response called regret kicks in. So, well, good. Neurologically speaking, when you think about your brain, where is regret showing up? So, regret is tied to the very region of your brain that's responsible for decision making and your emotional regulation. And this part of the brain allows you to reflect on your choices and imagine different outcomes. And that is very unique to us human beings. So, no other species on this earth has that capability. And that what makes being human sometimes so much more complex and so much more challenging than just being a dog or a cat. Well, on the premise that those pets are treated well. Because we have that functionality to think back and say, well, you know, what could have been? And we have this rumination going on. And if you go down the rabbit hole of regret and, imagine different scenarios that you have done or haven't done, that really weighs heavily on you. So essentially, regret is your brain's way of saying, hey, this didn't turn out the way we wanted, so let's learn from it. And that actually would be great, because if you would learn from all your regrets, then you will, in your present moment, make different choices. Yet, we don't see it that way. We didn't get really taught this way, so we often don't even know anything about regret and do things or don't do things and then sit with regret. Interestingly, research shows that regret is most often associated with inaction rather than action. And studies also have found out that while people may feel more immediate regret for mistakes they have made, the long-term regrets they carry are often about the things they didn't do. So the risks they didn't take, or the conversations they avoided, or opportunities they let pass. So think about it. The regret that you carry with you, that I asked you to bring into today's episode, is it about something you did, or is it about something you didn't do? Because often the things that we didn't do bring us to our knees because we are thinking this what if? What if X? What if Y? And that will often come with us until the rest of our life, and often onto our deathbed, where we really think, why didn't I go and ask that guy out? Why didn't I dive into difficult conversations and saved my marriage? Or why didn't I take on that job that may have paid less but would have brought more opportunities to me? And why is that? Why do we regret the things that we didn't do? And the reason for this is because when you act, when you take an action, even if it doesn't go as planned, even though it's fucked up or it goes haywire, you gain freaking clarity. You know the outcome and you can learn from it. But when you avoid acting, when you avoid the very thing that you're supposed to do, you are left with this uncertainty and the mind catalog of what ifs. And I think we have plenty of them. And there is a differentiation between regrets of action versus regrets of inaction. Now let's break that down further because that is important. Regrets of actions are the things you did, but you wish you hadn't. Maybe you took a job that wasn't right for you, or you said something in the heat of the moment to your best friend or your husband that wasn't good, or you made a choice that hurt someone else. So these regrets can sting, but they often provide immediate lessons. So, for example, I don't know how long ago it was. It was in 2011. So, if my math is correct, it's like 20, like 13, 14 years ago. I broke up with an ex-boyfriend of mine. I went to South Korea, study abroad, and I broke up with him a month after moving to Korea. And I took 2 weeks to tell him that I break up with him. So I was kind of ghosting him for these 2 weeks, and I never gave him like the closure that he needed. I never really told him why I was breaking up, and it's something that I know was absolutely a shit show. I'm not proud of this. This has not been something that, I feel like I should have done, but I've done it. And it really taught me the lesson of like, hey, you can't just hurt someone like that. You have to owe when you fall out of love and have a difficult conversation. Because the reason why I didn't really tell him or like made it really shitty for him was because I was so afraid to just go online and FaceTime him and say, hey, I don't think the relationship is right for me right now. I didn't have the guts, I didn't have the maturity, but I learned from it. And I have never done this ever again. And by the way, 3 years ago, I voice noted him and apologized profusely for that big mistake and for breaking his heart because I knew that that has traumatized him. And we had a beautiful exchange, and I know that would be actually a full other episode for another day. But it's something that I feel like was really absolutely shitty. But you know what? I learned a big lesson, and I learned also even years after to reach out to someone that you haven't talked for many many years and apologize for something. And it really, I didn't wanted, like, I didn't needed his forgiveness, but I forgave myself because I had the guts, the maturity to come to him 10 years later and say, you know what, I fucked up, I'm really sorry, and I know I broke your heart, and I know I traumatized you. That is my responsibility. I'll carry that, you know until I leave this world. And I just needed to get that out because you deserved an apology from me, and I'm very proud that I did that. So that is definitely not a regret that I have right now, that is like that I think about at all. But I had it for a very long time, like that I really thought this was really ugly, that was really not nice of me, and you know but I really took that as a big big lesson. So, and then there are regrets of inactions, the things you didn't do. This can feel like missed opportunities. Maybe you didn't start the business that you should have started or wanted to start some years ago. Maybe there was someone that you loved, and you didn't pursue this person, or the chances you just didn't take. Maybe it was a great job. Maybe it was the guy that maybe wasn't that, you know, attractive looking, but actually would have been the safer and better choice. We all are guilty of some of those kind of things. And what's tricky about inaction is that it leaves a void. It leaves this freaking void that can really feel like daggers in your heart, because you will never know what could have been, and that ambiguity can linger, and it can linger until you leave this world, and it is awful. I must say, all my regrets I have were not regrets of actions, these were regrets of inaction. And diving into today's podcast episode, I really wanted to bring you this distinction because, again, always think about it when you know that you are supposed to do something because you say, hey, that is something that I want to try out. It is better to do it and learn from it and having the clarity that, oh yeah, maybe it wasn't the right thing, but I tried it and at least now I know, versus not doing it and then years after years asking yourself, why didn't I freaking do it? That is awful. And I want to bring another personal story to this show today because, I'm all about authenticity and I love storytelling. So I want to share something with you about my biggest regret I have. And it is actually hard to speak about it. And I already feel like tears are coming up. It is that bad. But don't you worry, I've worked on that with my therapist. So I just want to share that with you. And if some tears are coming, let's just let it flow. So, when was it? My grandma's died 2013. And she was that one person in my life that, when I was very young, always believed in me. She's this person that deeply loved me and she saw the soul in me. She saw something so good in me, and I have a lot of cousins. I have 4 other siblings. So we were a bunch of people. She had a bunch of grandchildren, and she really, really loved me. I know, and that love always meant the world to me because back then I sometimes felt that no one will love me, but she did. And I think as a very small child, that saved me in the darkest moments of my childhood. Anyway, so and that's also the karma that ties into, the shitty breakup that I just told you about. So when I was in Korea, I met someone that I had a relationship with for 3 years, and it was a very emotional, abusive relationship. It was a hardcore narcissist. For 3 years, I allowed myself to be in this relationship. I take full responsibility for this. So, and I worked around a lot, not regretting this relationship because I got so many things out of it, and it also helps me to be such a better coach with this life experience, that I learned not to regret this decision to be in this relationship for 3 years and putting up with so much bullshit. But at the end of my grandma's life, my grandma died, and I deeply regret that when she passed, I was not there, because she was 5 hours away from where I lived back then in Vienna, but my sister, my brother-in-law, my mom were there when my grandmother passed away, so it was kind of foreseeable that it's her end. And first I regret that I didn't, just drove down and being with her in the last moment. So, but well, that's not even the regret I have. So then the funeral was, and my ex-boyfriend's father and sister were due to come to visit us for a week, and they came from Portugal. So my ex-boyfriend was from Portugal. So they flew over, and I had a moment where they asked me, like, my ex-boyfriend's father asked me, hey, we can postpone the vacation to another time. We can come in a week, we can come in a month. And we understand that you have a funeral, that your grandmother passed away, so I'll give you the chance to, and no hard feelings, all good. And because of the pressure of my ex-boyfriend, I was stupid enough to say, no, come. So I took them down to my grandma's village. It's a very nice village in Austria where you can really make amazing vacations. It's a vacation spot. And I went to the funeral of my grandma, but after the funeral ended, instead of spending time with my family and going back to my grandma's house, I just decided to spend the time with my ex-boyfriend and his family, and took them to skiing. And so the funeral was in the morning, and
my family went for dinner, for lunch. That's very common after a funeral. And I so deeply regret that I didn't say, at least there, hey guys, I want to spend the time with my family. I want to go back to my grandma's house. And this is actually the regret that I really have, that I didn't go back to my grand's house and just took something from her house that reminds me of her. There wasn't anything specific I could think of, but I regret not coming back one last time. And I regretted this for such a long time. And it's still something that deeply touches me. So it's something that I have regret. This is the one regret of anything. Everything else is cool, but this is the regret that I have to carry to my deathbed. And I know my grandma forgave me for this. I mean, there's nothing to forgive, but I should have spent this time just with her, even if she would have passed. But I should have gone back to the house and looked around one more last time. So, well, that is a regret that I have, and that is the regret of inaction, right? That is the thing that I didn't do, and this is so hard for me because I always ask myself, what could I have taken from that apartment that I would have taken to America that would always remind me of her, because she had so many good things, like a rosary, or I remember small little details of like some decor that I found really cute. And yeah, so this is something that I totally missed. And to this date, when I come to an aunt, to one of my brothers, I see some of the things from my grandmother's house. So they took things from her apartment, from the house, and I'm like, oh my god, I could have taken that, or I could have taken something else. So yeah, that's something I deeply regret. So this is my biggest life regret, and that's very authentic, something very vulnerable, because I know some people will judge that and say, I mean, come on, if that's your biggest life regret, blah blah blah. But that is something so deeply personal, because again, this woman gave me so much. That is something that I cannot even put in words. Anyway, so wiping away the tears and cleaning my nose helped. Back to the episode. And there is another layer. So we had the regrets of action and inaction, and there's another layer to this. The regrets tied to what we didn't know sooner. And these are the ones that often feel hard to reconcile. And these are the regrets of not knowing sooner. So think about it. How many times have you looked back and thought, if only I'd known then what I know now? These regrets aren't about any specific mistakes, they are about growth. And they stem from realizing that at a different point in your life, you simply didn't have the knowledge, tools, perspective, resources that you have today. And I love that regret of not knowing sooner, and that also helped me reframing a little bit the thing with my grandmother, because I didn't know back then how to handle my ex-boyfriend, who was so fucking abusive to me. And I take responsibility here. So I mean, I choose to be with him, and I wasn't able to get out of this relationship. So it's not that anyone forced me. So I always want to make that clear when I say abusive relationship. For me, I was the one staying in this relationship. So that was knowledge I didn't have sooner. I didn't know how to get out of this. I didn't even know what's going on. I was so entangled into an unhealthy, toxic dynamic that I just didn't know better. And I also didn't know that I should have spent the time with my family and prioritized my family. So that is definitely where I could help myself with this deep regret of not being able to, like of the inaction of not spending the time with my family and going back to my grand's house. But again, I didn't know better. And what also helped me to, find peace with not going back to my grand's house and just the very thing that I just told you is self compassion. And that's where self compassion is so important because you can hold yourself accountable for knowledge you just didn't have. Regrets over not knowing better are a sign that you have grown. They are just a real big piece of evidence of your own evolution. And Dr. Christine Neff, she's a leading researcher on self compassion, wrote many, many books. She's amazing. I can just recommend her books highly. She talks about the importance of just treating yourself with kindness when you face your own imperfections. So instead of, beating yourself up for what you didn't know, acknowledge that you were doing the best you could with the information and resources you had at the time. And that is where I forgave myself and found so much compassion for, part of me that is so sad. And that part of me that came up on the podcast episode today that you heard crying. And that's where I give myself so much compassion, so much love for, hey, you just didn't know better. You were in such a difficult situation. And looking back, of course, it's easier said than done, right? So I want you to think about your own regret that I asked you to come with into today's show and really think about it. Is this something that you did or didn't do? And, did you have back then the knowledge that you have today? Did you have the resources back then that you have today, or the tools, or the insight, the wisdom? And I probably would guess no, you didn't. So give yourself grace, cut yourself some slack, be kind to yourself. Because, what you didn't know back then is so much easier now to say, I wish I had done, but you did know better. You were, maybe, you were a fool. Yeah, maybe you were immature. Yeah, maybe you were just a human being doing life. And life can be so hard at times, So be kind to yourself and give yourself compassion because that is what helps me. And while I was crying now on the show and telling you about it, I gave myself so much compassion. And that's also what lets me share this so vulnerably with you. So the question is now, moving through regrets. And what does science say about moving through regrets? And again, moving through regrets, whether it's tied to something you did or something you didn't do or something you just didn't know. So here's what science tells us about how to move through regret. I mentioned the most important step already. That's self-compassion. So studies show that people who practice self-compassion cope with regret really most effectively. So, self-compassion involves 3 components. And if you can, just take notes right now because it's so important. The 3 components of compassion are self-kindness, recognizing your shared humanity, and mindfulness. So instead of criticizing yourself for your regrets, approach them with curiosity and also the understanding that, hey, you are human and what you feel, everyone else is also feeling. And give yourself kindness and don't be hard on yourself because I know, especially us women, we can be so hard on ourselves. Sometimes harder on ourselves than any other man because we are feeling so deeply. Men don't feel as deeply as we do. We do. And there's a biological reason for this because we women are made to nurture children. We need to feel deeply. So give yourself a lot of love today, okay? A lot of kindness. And also the mindfulness is so important to really think about, I messed up. I could have done better. But you know what? I'm learning from it. And that is where mindfulness kicks in so beautifully because you can take this now and draw a good lesson out of it and promise yourself that you will never end up there again. The second thing that I want to share with you that science says that we should shift is from rumination to reflection because we all do it. rumination, replaying regrets over and over, replaying different scenarios in our mind, masturbating mentally about what could have been, and imagining a complete different story, and then bashing ourselves because our reality looks different. So reflection, on the other hand, it really allows you to process what happened and just extract the right lessons out of it and move forward in your life and take the lessons, incorporate that into your daily life, into your present, so that your future will not look full of regrets or mistakes that you've already done in the past. And you can ask yourself, what did this experience teach me? How can I use this knowledge to make better choices moving forward? Then there is also the, taking preventative actions, which is, for example, while, regret is inevitable to some degree, so we cannot not, we can't eliminate it, okay? But to some degree, we can. So there are ways to, um, minimize regrets. So studies, suggest that being intentional and aligned with your values, that's why I'm preaching values all the time, can reduce regrets. So, for example, when you make a decision based on what truly matters to you, what truly is in alignment to your values, you are less likely to look back with disappointment. And then what I already reframed in the beginning in the podcast is, to reframe regret as growth, because every regret is really just holds a lesson for you. And instead of seeing it as a failure, it's just a stepping stone. And it's not that we are just doing positive thinking here, or, you know, talk ourselves into something, no, it's just, if you view regret as a marker of how far you've come and not how far you have fallen, it just really helps. It really does help. And I love to reframe things when I've also, processed the very thing. So that's why I love, for example, shifting to reflections and taking really the lessons out of everything. Yeah, and living a regretful, resilient life is the thing that I think is so important to, yeah, incorporate in our lives. So one of the best ways to live with fewer regrets, because again, it's not preventable, but you can have fewer regrets in your life, is to really align your actions with your values. So every client of mine needs to know their 4 to 5 core values, because otherwise, I always remind them, if you don't know them, if you can't tell me them, when I wake you up in the middle of the night, then you have to go back to the drawing boards. Because you need to know what truly matters to you. And when you know what is really most important to you, you are less likely to be swayed by any external pressures or fleeting desires, but you align your actions to your values. And yeah, let's be real here. I mean, you're going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. So you're going to have moments where you look back and think, oh, I could have done that differently, or why didn't I, why did I do that? And that's part of being human. And, that's part of why we are differentiated from other species, because I told you there's a brain region where we are able to think different scenarios. That is just, what makes us so human. And yeah, when I think about the regrets tied to what I didn't know sooner, I remind myself that life isn't about knowing everything up front. I started to see regrets as a compass, and for me, it's about growing through what I didn't know back then. So, as my closing thoughts here, and as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. Regrets aren't there to shame you. Don't forget that. It's also nothing to be ashamed of or feel guilty. If you feel ashamed or guilty about something, really work on that, because you will carry this with you. And if it happens that some other regrets pile up, you will have so much to in your backpack of life to carry, and that can be heavy. Regrets are here as some potent teachers if you let regrets to teach you something. Yeah, and the question isn't whether you will have regrets or that you have your regrets, it's really what you will do with them. So will you let them hold you back, or will you let them guide you toward a more intentional, aligned, and most importantly, meaningful life? And yeah, that's a wrap. That's all about I have to say about regrets today. I hope you found this episode meaningful, helpful. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how you view the one regret, or maybe you brought some more regrets to this today's show, how you view them now. And maybe you want to visit this episode and re-listen again. And yeah, I hope that you view the regret that you brought today as something that, hey, well, I've learned something so big, something so grand. And while it will not be inevitable to not have regrets, I'll make sure I'm an inch or two taller because I grew from this wisdom. I truly wish that. And yeah, thank you for allowing me to be vulnerable. Sometimes those episodes are here for me to share from my heart, to not, cut that part out, and just let you know that I have also regrets. I have also things that bring me lots of tears, some things that deeply touch me. And that's why we are here. We are here to share our authentic selves, and there's no cutting things out from the podcast, not even my amps or word fillers. And I know sometimes I say the wrong things or the wrong word, but who freaking cares, right? Okay, so thank you so much for tuning in today. It means the world to me that you are listening, that you're here with me. It truly does. And yeah, if this resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on a regret you've been carrying and what it can teach you, and how you can move forward with grace and loads of self-compassion. So until next time, my love, keep growing, keep learning, and keep living deeply and authentically. Talk soon. Talk next week. Bye.